I am here on an appropriately gloomy day to talk about everything that I read in autumn. Although we're now technically in winter, it still feels like autumn because the tree outside my window is so pretty right now. It's reached its peak red and yellow color. There's so many leaves falling on the ground. It is incredibly picturesque. So the first book I'm going to talk about is My Salinger Year by Joanna Rakoff, which, when you say that as an Australian, I don't know if this is a phrase overseas. I think it's particularly Australian, but to tell someone to rack off is to tell them to like go away or fuck off if you want to use the rude terms. So whenever I saw the cover, it kind of made me laugh. But this is technically a memoir about the author's time working for a literary agent in New York who happened to be the agent for J.D. Salinger. The tone and style of the book though reads much more like a novel than a memoir. The author acknowledges that she has changed events around and like changed names obviously to give it a better narrative flow. I decided to read this because I watched the film version at the beginning of last year and I really loved it. It was one of my favorite films of last year. But it was kind of funny going into this book because I realized I completely forgot about the douchebag boyfriend that she has, to the point where I couldn't even remember who played him. And my takeaway from the film was so much about her experience working in an office and the sort of experience you can have in your first full-time job where you actually get really into it and you quite enjoy the office environment and like enjoy your work, and it kind of distracts you away from the thing that you are actually passionate about, which in her case is obviously writing. That was my main takeaway from the film, and I obviously just blanked out the boyfriend part because I found that so boring in comparison. It's a very well-worn trope, the lead character having a very obnoxious and pretentious boyfriend who's actually obviously not nearly as great as he makes himself out to be. But that boyfriend is a huge part of this novel. And it was just so frustrating because he's so obviously annoying and not a nice person. And she just sticks with him for so long. And I found the office part of it a little bit repetitive. It just didn't come to life in the same way as the film did for me, which is an interesting and rare thing to find a film that I prefer better than the book. That was actually a video that Alison Pages did recently, and I've been kind of tempted to take that idea and do my own version of the video. I hope that's okay. People don't seem to really do tag videos anymore, but I feel like that kind of concept could be considered a tag. It wouldn't just be copying, but it would be my own version of it. I don't know on the ethics around copying video ideas anymore. When things were a tag, it was so easy because you were meant to do your own version of it. Anyway, if I was to make that video, this would definitely be on the list. So the next book I read was An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. This I found in an op shop and I've heard about it a lot, and I think it was pretty big when it came out. It's a novel about newlyweds Celestial and Roy, who are visiting his family in his hometown in Louisiana. They're staying in a hostel. Something happens where a woman accuses Roy of sexually assaulting her when he definitely did not. He's a black man, he gets sent to jail, and she is sort of left to live out her life, still married to Roy, but creating a life without him because they'd only just been married. They didn't sort of have these strong bonds that might keep their sort of romance alive while he's in prison. There's really a lot going on in this book that is so interesting, but I really ended up disliking this book because it ended up being mainly about a love triangle between these two characters and Celestial's child best friend Andre. And while Roy's in prison, they kind of realize that they do have romantic feelings for each other rather than just being friends as they initially thought. And yeah, eventually Roy gets out of prison and it just becomes this weird fight between the three of them when no one seems to be able to just say it how it is. And the character of Celestial especially, she kind of leaves both of these men hanging instead of just saying, yeah, I want to be with this one, or I don't want either of you, leave me alone. Like, that was so frustrating, and I didn't feel like the book explained her mindset well enough for me to understand it. And I just found that this love triangle aspect detracted so much from the rest of the story that was so interesting. Next, I decided to read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. I really enjoyed The Mothers by Brit Bennett when I read it, possibly last year or the year before, I can't remember. So I'd been meaning to read this one since I finished that one, basically. This is about two twin sisters who live in a town which is renowned for having a black community of very light-skinned black Americans. These two twins are not very well off and and so they run away together to New Orleans, and then one of the sisters disappears, and we basically find out that she has decided to pass as white, and so creates a whole new life for herself where she pretends that she's a white person and can tell nobody about the fact that she is actually black. And of course the other sister is left bereft, has no idea where her sister is, and they just sort of grow up apart and have these completely different lives. This is such an interesting concept. It follows the sisters' points of views as well as their daughters' points of views, but I found the book didn't really delve as much into the themes as I kind of wanted. I feel like having so many points of views and also having the book set across multiple decades kind of made everything feel a bit disparate. You definitely got really interesting snapshots into each of the characters' lives, but it all felt a little bit surface level. I really felt like I didn't get as deep into these characters' brains as I wanted to, even though you did get a lot of insights. I definitely enjoyed the book the more it went along, and I feel like it really brought to life America in these different decades from like the 60s up to the 80s, and the characters were all very interesting, but yeah, there was just something missing for me to make it like fully enjoyable and like a 4-star read. Next, I read Love and Virtue by Diana Reid. This is an Australian novel about a girl called Michaela who is 18 years old. She's going to the University of Sydney, which is probably the most prestigious university in Australia. She's from Canberra, so she has to live in student accommodation at the uni. So student accommodation is usually just like apartment buildings that students live in. But at this university, the colleges do have a history and tradition. Michaela lives in an all-girls one, and there's also a boys one that's kind of the brother college to the one she's living in. And I believe the story is based on real-life events where obviously a lot of terrible behavior was found to be happening in the colleges. Can't remember the word for it. There's like a particular word for that type of uni orientation that students give other students, you know, where they make them play horrible drinking games and do really awful degrading things, and sexual assault seems to be basically the norm. So although the colleges themselves are fictional, it's based on real things that have happened, not to the author herself necessarily, but she obviously would have been aware of stuff like that going on. The main character Michaela becomes friends with this girl Eve, who she sort of has a love-hate relationship with that blossoms into full-on hate when Eve does something that she considers a necessary thing to achieve greater good. It's sort of a story about whether if one bad thing creates a greater good, is it still a bad thing to do? But it's also just about being a uni student in Sydney, the experiences of that, and I felt like it was very accurately portrayed. Not that I had the same uni experience at all, but the way that the characters talk was so familiar, was so accurate, particularly Australian I felt as well, which even in Australian books doesn't always come across that well, I think. There is a part where Michaela has a relationship with one of her tutors, which is such an overdone plot point, but I felt like it kind of worked quite well in the novel, and I felt like the characters were individual enough that it didn't make it feel redundant or boring to read in any way. I raced through this book so fast. It was just not just easy to read, but just so all-involving, and I just wanted to find out what happened next. It was really, really good. I'm really excited that Diana Reid's written another book already. I think that's coming out later this year, which I'm very keen to read. Would highly recommend. It's definitely going to be in my top 10 of the year for sure. And lastly, I read The Longest Journey by E.M. Forster, which did kind of feel like The Longest Journey. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but certainly not the best Forster that I've read. So this was the last E.M. Forster that I had left to read. If I was to do a ranking of them all, I would say this one would kind of be in the middle. I felt like the writing was quite engaging and the story was interesting enough to keep me reading, but certainly nowhere on the levels of Howard's End and A Room with the View. And I also do like Morris as well. I think those are the only three I would go back and reread. The other three I didn't enjoy enough to want to experience them again. This is about a man called Ricky. We first meet him when he's at university at Cambridge. We're told that he is lame, so walks with a limp, I believe, but he loves being at Cambridge. He loves talking about academic ideas with his best friends, but then he ends up marrying this woman called Agnes, who's kind of an old friend, and he sort of gets overwhelmed by her and her brother's pragmatism, their crass pragmatism I should say, because they are shown to be just quite a vulgar people because they're too obsessed with money. Like a lot of E.M. Forster's novels, there's no overarching plot as such. Things just kind of happen, and I feel like a lot of authors from this time do this, but I feel like he does this especially, is that he'll have pages and pages of people just rambling on about something that doesn't really matter that much. and then something major will happen, like a character will die, and it is tied up in a couple of sentences. And that happens several times in this book. Quite a few characters conveniently die. I say conveniently because the plot would have gone in a very different direction, or the characters would have just been quite inconveniently in the way of the plot moving forward if they hadn't died. Ian Forster also is very good at writing very realistic characters. He doesn't really rely on stereotypes. These people are so real, but in a way that when they're annoying is just like frustrating, because you know people who are like this. I think my main problem with the book is that I didn't like Ricky enough to really care what happened to him. He just felt very susceptible and not that smart, and it's quite a tragic story. His story is very tragic, but then I didn't like him enough to really be sad about how tragic his life was. It was interesting. There's a lot in it. It felt quite different to his other novels, especially because there's no real scenes over in Europe, which he usually likes to set his books at least partly in other countries. But yeah, I'm glad I have completed Ian Forster now. That was everything I read in the season of autumn. If you've read anything good recently, let me know so I can add it to my TBR. I will see you in my next video. Bye.